All right, guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mats channel. It's Maddie here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything going on in the competitive world of Pokemon Pocket. This past weekend was PMPT 29, a very special tournament. Not only the first new PMPT tournament of this new season of tournaments, but also a new season of Pokemon Pocket, right? It was the first weekend since Pulsing Aura was released and all of the new cards came out. Very interesting stuff that happened this weekend. The live stream was incredible. At one point, we had over 1,000 people watching live. Big shout out to Jay and Taj and Tilly TCG who hopped on the live stream, of course, on Sunday. Also want to give a big shout out to all of our, people that make the tournament happen, all of the judges, all of the moderators. It's such an incredible team. It's crazy that we're able to do this every week. And it's crazy that we're going on our 30th weekly tournament series. So PMPT number 30 is open for registration. Link down in the description below. If you guys want to get in there and play this weekend, I would heavily encourage doing it. Big shout out to everybody that participated. Again, over 500 people competed. It's always incredible to see how much support Pokemon Pocket still gets and how live, the community really is. But what we're going to do is break down the standings of our tournament this past weekend. We're going to talk about, which decks did best. We'll kind of go through all of the deck lists individually, break down the final standings, and then at the end of the video, typically we like to go over the metagame data and get a little bit more of a full story. So that's enough of an intro. It's about a minute and a half. Pretty typical, I guess. Very casual here. Here are the standings. This is what happened this past weekend. There's a lot to break down here. However, Z Verum here from Puerto Rico, first place, 12-1-1 record, and he was playing Mega Sceptile. That's right. I made a video earlier this week talking about how Mega Sceptile was the strongest new deck. I think that, Mega Lucario, of course, does more damage. It's a very strong card, very strong deck. Even things like Zoroark are, strong new cards that were released in the set. I just felt like, Sceptile was a unique thing that got kind of put into the metagame at a time where, over the last 3-4 months, like Hydreigon really has been completely dominant, and Sceptile seemingly had a really good matchup into Hydreigon. It came out firing at the beginning of this week, Sceptile did, and then kind of got pushed down a little bit by a bunch of people playing Blaziken in the middle of the week, specifically to counter Sceptile, and it does struggle, particularly because of cast form early in that matchup, but Sceptile does have very unique matchups across most things in the metagame, and it has a winning matchup into Hydreigon, which is why I really wanted to cover it early this week. No surprise that Hydreigon, coincidentally, was the most played deck this weekend, and Sceptile ended up getting first place. Not only that, but we had Demdud123 from the United States in 6th place, and then we also had Drawn also playing Sceptile. These are all different lists. There isn't one Sceptile list that has been, fully nailed down, at least yet. But no surprise to me that 3 Sceptile find their way into top 8 here. Very impressive. 1 Hydreigon here. This is Magma Prelux in 4th place. And then in 2nd place here, also in Grand Finals, was Fearless, or 7 Earless from Canada, another common player here, one of the better players honestly, the standings here were absolutely stacked, so you know that all of the best players in Pocket were coming out this weekend. He was in 2nd place, made it to Grand Finals, playing Magnezone. Now, Magnezone and any Magnezone or Oricorio deck typically does well early in seasons, just because people don't necessarily counterplay for Oricorio when new cards come out. That being said, this deck list has been further upgraded. We'll take a look at it in a little bit with the new Magnezone EX, which is now why this deck is categorized differently on the list, because now we have a Magnezone EX. So that's why it's called Magnezone and Magnezone. We'll break down the list in a little bit. And then we have Rii Shibata from Japan, a couple of Japanese players here in top 16, which I'm always so surprised about. I want to give a big shout out to Japan and all of the Japanese players. I don't know if they watch the content that we post on YouTube, but they do play in the tournaments pretty regularly. And given the time zones and the timing of which we play or run the tournaments, it's obviously very difficult. I think they'd have to start the tournament like midnight over in Japan. So it's always incredible that we get the Japanese players playing, and they always do well because, of course, they have some of the best players in the game. So anyway, big shout out to Japan. Really appreciate it. In 3rd place, and he was playing Dark Greninja, one of the more underrated decks, it really in the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 seasons. Dark Greninja is one of my favorite decks in the game. It does play Chingling. Greninja was actually pretty prevalent here in the standings this weekend. I think Greninja is still very, very strong. The Cyrus win condition with the Greninja Water Shuriken, still one of the stronger things in the game. We're not seeing a lot of Suicune. In fact, 0 Suicune in basically any of the standings this weekend. Very interesting to take a look at, and we'll break that down later on. But shout out to him in third place. And then, like I said, Magma Prelux playing Hydreigon. Our only Hydreigon in top 8. We did have YFRHF, another Japanese player that always does well, in 11th place playing Hydreigon. Now, keep in mind, it was the most played deck this weekend, but I think it was incredibly well represented. Like in Top Cut, there was, I think, more Hydreigon than any other deck. But, you know, a lot of the other decks that saw play in the metagame just happen to be strong into Hydreigon, so it was definitely more of a counter-meta prevalent day 2 of the tournament, which is why we see, you know, one Hydreigon Prelux, again, one of the better players in the game, in 4th place, but lots of Sceptile, lots of, you know, Altaria, Greninja, things like that, right, higher up in the standings. These are decks that typically do well into Hydreigon. JP Phenomenal from Poland, also playing Magnezone, so double Magnezones here in top 8, and like I said, the other Sceptile players. If we get beyond top 8, actually here in 8th place, we can't forget Meiji from Japan. I apologize if I pronounced the name wrong. This is Altaria Greninja, so one Altaria here in top 8. It was the Greninja variant. Sleep Altaria, not really seeing a lot of play early this season. That's an interesting thing to note. I do think that the Sleep, Bad Dreams archetype has maybe shifted over to Lucario. Lots of people playing that Lucario deck, including Froggy X. Fab here from France in 10th place. We'll break down the list in a little bit. But yeah, Meiji from Japan, as well as Envy Lulu from France, both 8th and 9th place, just bubbling out of top 8 there. Unfortunately, Lulu did, but also playing Altaria Greninja. Like I said, another Hydreigon here in 11th place. A couple more Altaria Greninjas. So, I mean, we had 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in top 13. None of them just really broke super high in the standings. One Sleep Altaria. This is Don Pedro from France, playing Sleep Altaria. So this is the only Sleep Altaria that we saw really high in the standings. But we did have another Sleep Lucario, and this is going to be Light XZ from Singapore, another great player, 17th place, just outside top 16. We did have another Hydreigon in 16th place, so in top 16 there were 3 Hydreigon. And then Hassam, another Sceptile. 3 different technical, builds for Sceptile in top 16, which is really interesting. Sceptile can be played so many different ways, and Limitless always categorizes decks very specifically based around the number of Pokemon that are seeing play, right? So the core of Sceptile is seeing a lot of play, but there's a lot of different variants. And typically when it comes to, decks and being dominant in the metagame in terms of rising up into extreme popularity, it's typically a disadvantage if, a particular Pokemon or core of a deck is seeing play so many different ways. We kind of saw that with Altaria historically, and I think we're going to be seeing that with Sceptile unless there is like one archetype or one like core deck that sees more play than anything else. Maybe it will be Verim's deck here in first place, but Sceptile definitely well positioned into Hydreigon and other top decks of the metagame. If we go beyond top 16, we did have a Meowscarada. This is TGA Kronos from Brazil, 20th place. Had a really great run playing Meowscarada, really fun deck list. Another deck that does well into Hydreigon, I think fundamentally, but a deck that should be buffed with the recent release of Fragrant Forest, and I think that is an inherent upside, a very, very strong upside that these grass-type decks have that really nothing else has in the metagame, a stadium like that. One Manectric did kind of squeeze in here, 23rd place. This is going to be Joel 217 from Mexico. So Manectric getting a little bit of placement, a little bit more Lucarios down here, another Sleep Altaria. These are going to be traditional, more standard Lucario lists, meaning like non-Sleep Lucario. Also had Red the Champion. So a couple of them here in top 32. And then if we go down, we had a Ninetales Crawdon deck, definitely more of a fringe meta deck, but not a terrible deck. One that a lot of people like here. Did find some representation in top 32, as well as Super Piece, one of my favorite players, one of the best players in the game, from Germany as well. 30th place playing Zoroark. So Zoroark did kind of find its way into top 32, but I will tell you that virtually nobody played Zoroark this weekend. Everybody's sort of electing to play Hydreigon still. But anyway, that's the final standings. Let's break into these deck lists here and talk about them in a little bit more detail. This is going to be the first placing deck of the tournament. This is Z Verim's deck from Puerto Rico. Shout out to Puerto Rico. Shout out to Mega Sceptile. This is a little bit of a different deck list than what we're kind of seeing with Sceptile early on the season. Definitely some Pheromosa stuff going down with some Poison Barbs and some Nihilego. I think a lot of people realizing that, Nihilego is a good card and it's certainly really nice to boost the damage, but for the most part, Pheromosa chip damage and then Sceptile's Poison, along with just something like a Rocky Helmet, is typically enough to hit most breakpoints. One of the more relevant things that we saw with this deck list in particular was Kartana. So bringing it back to the Buzzwole days, we got one Kartana, one Pheromosa in here. Kartana is going to be super good because it 1-hit KOs Dinos, right, with weakness. It's just a really strong Pokemon into really any dark type matchup. Zoroark is the same deal, right, because Zorua gets 1-hit KO'd by Kartana. So with weakness, it's really nice because you're going to KO basically any basic, pre-evolution dark type Pokemon. but also can KO baby Pokemon, which is something that Pheromosa really can't do. And then, so the Pheromosa is going to be really good for the bench damage and the Cyrus win condition. Really good to kind of target your opponent's Pokemon that you think they're going to bring up later in the game. I think you had a matchup into Altaria where Pheromosa was quite relevant, right? The Pheromosa chip damage along with, Rocky Helmet and Sceptile, it really ended up being enough to kind of win the game. And that's what I do like about this deck list, is that we have the core Sceptile package, but then we also have 3 leadoff Pokemon that are all really good for their own specific purpose. Kartana, Pheromosa, and then Chingling. The Chingling's kind of underrated, still going to be a really, really good Pokemon into anything that plays rare candies, obviously. And as we know, Hydreigon does play rare candy. But the other thing that people never seem to realize about Chingling is that it stops you from playing Pokeball. Like at the end of the day, item lock can win you the game. If your opponent just doesn't draw the right cards, let's say they lead off with 1 basic Pokemon and they don't really draw into any other basic Pokemon and their hand is full of like 2 Pokeballs, like Chingling will stop them from really progressing at all in the early game unless they can like copycat or draw out of it. I think Chingling is still underrated. It's still a really strong Pokemon. No surprise to me that Chingling found its way onto the first placing deck. People have doubted it. People have doubted Chingling. They just said it's not that good anymore. Like it's all Sleep Igglybuff, and there's a lot of other options in the metagame. I don't think Chingling is as good as it maybe was when B1 first released, but it's still an incredibly valuable card, and it's certainly, I'm sure, helped Verum in certain matchups. As well as Kartana, again, heavy Hydreigon throughout this entire tournament. We can take a look at his matchups. We can see he hit 3 Hydreigon in Top Cut, but only hit 1 in day 1, right? So, I mean, like, he had to kind of go through the gauntlet in the first day of competition. His only loss of the tournament was to Blaziken. That's no surprise. This Blaziken deck with Cast Form is specifically there to just sort of beat, it just sort of beats Sceptile. Like, it's the one thing that Blaziken really does well in this metagame, although it struggles into most other matchups. But beating Zoroark, beating Hydreigon, beating an Altaria Gourgeist, beating Magnezone, Sleep Altaria, and Lucario. So, again, we kind of went through the gauntlet of every like top tier meta deck strategy that saw play this weekend, and then ended up tying against Fearless here in top 8, but hit him again in the finals. So it's always kind of funny to see how that happens. They intentionally tie at the end of day 1 and then reunite in the grand finals where he did end up getting the win there. But yeah, beat 3 Hydreigon in Top Cut, and again, Hydreigon was the most well-represented deck in day 2. So again, Sceptiles just sort of ended up being a pretty good choice, right? And that's kind of what I've been saying. And honestly, I know people like playing Hydreigon. I think for the most part, people's interpretations of Hydreigon at this point are that they're a bit tired of it. It's sort of a deck that's a little bit cheesy, with the rare candy turn 2 stuff, as well as Lucky Ice Pop. So having a new deck in the metagame that can hold its own into most other things, besides fire, of course, but being really good into that matchup specifically is a really big deal. Sceptile kind of taking the place of Suicune almost in the metagame in terms of its overall positioning. However, the good thing about Sceptile is that it's actually a lot better into the lightning type matchups than something like a Suicune would be. And that's a really big deal. Rocky Helmet plus Kartana, Pheromosa, it's enough to deal with Oricorios, as well as the poison from Mega Sceptile. So typically Grass does do well into Lightning, but that's usually because of all of the healing in the sustain that Grass type decks typically have. Sceptile doesn't really play any healing, or at least most Sceptile decks don't play healing, and it's interesting that it's still able to hold its own into Magnezone, so I think that's pretty cool. I don't think it's like a great matchup, but it's not like a horrible matchup, you know? Anyway, shout out to Verum. Really like the deck list. It's really good. 1 X speed in here, which I do think it kind of makes a lot of sense as well. One of the downsides to playing Mega Sceptile is that it discards an energy when you attack. So it's really difficult to go from a Sceptile into a second Sceptile. You most of the time, like almost every time, you're kind of just getting into Sceptile and then ending the game with it. There's not really any way to like pivot off of that because you're discarding an energy after you attack. But the X speed is going to be really nice because sometimes like you want to retreat, but of course you don't really want to spend the energy cost because Sceptile does have a 2 energy cost. You know what I mean? So it's a good card. I like X speed in the deck list. Maybe you lead Pheromosa, but you want Kartana for the dinos. There's a lot of scenarios like that, or vice versa. You know what I mean? So X speed's going to be really nice there for some control in the early game. Shout out to Verum. Shout out to Sceptile winning its first tournament of the first weekend that it's legal. No surprise there. I think it's just a really nice deck to have in the metagame. A real grass deck, a real tempo-based grass deck that can hold its own throughout the greater metagame, but specifically good into Hydreigon. Next up, let's take a look at Fearless's deck from Canada. Shout out to Canada. And this is Magnezone. This is new Magnezone. This is kind of what people are playing. It's interesting because in a metagame right now with a lot of Sceptile and Lucario decks not necessarily being, fully figured out, right? There's a lot of versions of it. Magnezone immediately came out and people knew what they were playing. There wasn't a lot of questions as to what we were playing in Magnezone. Yes, the archetype already existed, so I understand why that's the case. we just swapped out one of the Mirror Shot Magnezones for Magnezone EX. The rest of the deck is virtually the exact same. It's exactly what you thought it would be. Playing one Lucky Ice Pop instead of a Pokemon Center Lady, you know, I mean, there's definitely some RNG involved for Ice Pop. I think we definitely saw some more Oricorio stay alive for longer than they should throughout this tournament, but that happens sometimes. Lucky Ice Pop is a broken card, but everything else about this deck is just really good. With the one Ogerpon, going to be enough. It's going to be enough for the sleep matchups most of the time, and that's going to allow you to not necessarily need PCL, and you could just sort of play Lucky Ice Pop and have overall less supporters in the deck. What's interesting is that he's played double Cyrus in here, which I think is kind of crazy, but also, you know what, Cyrus is kind of the primary win condition card in the game, and none of these Pokemon deal an extraordinary amount of damage, so you're not one-KOing most things. Cyrus kind of does make sense. One thing I think is just inherently good about Magnezone now is that the fact that we have things like Lycia and Clemont, right? The improvements made to Oricorio Magnezone over the last, you know, I don't know, half a year have been pretty dramatic. You know, now we have Magnezone EX, which is 180 HP, hits for 130. It's just a big Pokemon, does a lot of damage, and it's a really good card to have in a deck that just was kind of missing something exactly like this, you know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, nothing else we can really say here. When you go Lycia and fill your bench here, and then you could go like turn 2 Clement and then you get both Magneton out, it feels a little bit crazy, right? Like the 50 HP Magnemites with Lycia is crazy, but then also being able to grab both Magneton with Clement makes this deck a lot more consistent into that like turn 3, turn 4 range than it ever has been. And again, it's Oricorio, so, you know, most of the decks right now, not necessarily well positioned to deal with Oricorio. We see this player did not hit any Hydreigon on his way to Grand Finals, and that's typically, didn't hit a single Hydreigon this entire tournament, quite frankly, which is a little bit crazy. His only losses were to Sleep Lucario and then, you know, Verum in Grand Finals. So very easily could have won the tournament, considering that he did not hit a single Hydreigon, but that's, you know, that's what happens. You know what I mean? When you play Hydreigon, you're kind of hoping to hit Magnezones, and when you're playing Magnezone, you're hoping not to hit Hydreigon. And if that's kind of the case, then, you know, you're going to be pretty well positioned into most other decks. It's just, you know, that's the reality of the metagame. The more representation and viability that Oricorio has in the metagame, the healthier it is. And that's my interpretation of things. It always just feels a little bit not great when, you know, the whole Oricorio aspect of the metagame can be just sort of pushed out by everybody playing Hydreigon, which is one of the main factors why people play Hydreigon, is because, you know, you don't have to ever worry about Oricorio and you're a really strong deck into most other things. So Sceptile kind of really saving the health of the metagame in quite a few ways. I think it's unique because, again, it can beat Oricorio Magnezone fairly easily, and it beats Hydreigon. So there's not really anything else in the game that can't do that. So shout out to Sceptile. Next up here is going to be Ryu Shibata's deck from Japan. Shout out to Japan. 10-3, third place, made top 4. This is going to be sort of one of the new things that's happening in the metagame, which is Lucky Egg with your baby Pokemon. So this is sort of like kind of the new tech in the metagame right now. Dark Greninja plays Chingling. However, there were some like Dark Greninja decks back in the day that last season that were playing like Sleep Darkrai. And I think in general, it's just a little bit too much for the deck list. Like, I think if you're playing Dark Greninja, you just kind of would rather play Chingling. And the whole concept of Dark Greninja is that it's a bit of a control deck. It's not like the craziest, you know, thing in the world in terms of its damage output, but a very controlling deck for varying different scenarios, right? We got double Water Shuriken Greninja, double Cyrus. So that's toxic, like, inherently. And every deck that plays Cyrus Greninja is going to be kind of annoying. But not only that, but double Chingling. So we got item lock in here, and then we also have Darkness Claw with Mega Absol to discard supporter cards, and then the extra damage from Darkrai EX. This deck's been around for a very long time, and I'll tell you what, it's never not been good. It's never not been good. It's always been a good deck list. Just never been that popular of a deck list, and yet another example of Chingling being a very valuable Pokemon. But yeah, the concept of Lucky Egg being that you can attach it to your baby Pokemon, you know, use the effect of your baby Pokemon, and then not really get punished for this baby Pokemon just being able to get KO'd on turn 1, right? Like, you're like, okay, I'll get turn 1 item lock down, and then I'll draw 3-4 cards. It's like, okay, like, that's a little bit crazy. Lucky Egg is very, very relevant. Great draw supporter, or great draw support in really any deck playing baby Pokemon. And I think we're seeing Lucky Egg in varying other baby decks as well, especially like Sleep Altaria. No Badoo. I know some people might be curious about Badoo. It's really not that relevant of a card. Unfortunately, like the effect of ability locking is strong, just not in the form of Badoo. Like, it's just like your opponent can evolve and then wipe the negative effect. It just doesn't really make any sense. There's not really any basic Pokemon with abilities that are just going to be chilling in play. You know, in these games, it can be good. You can swap into a Hydreigon and attack for 30 damage with weakness and then stop them from being able to do anything. Like, it's relevant in that sense, but it's not a great leadoff option. Not nearly as strong of a leadoff as Chingling and Igglybuff is with Darkrai, you know? But anyway, shout out to Rishibata. Love Dark Greninja. And then Magma Prelux, top 4. Prelux? This is kind of the new age Hydreigon. This is just what people are playing now. I do think Hydreigon has been buffed. I think it's been buffed by Bombardier. Bombardier is a really good card. It's crazy that this Pokemon hits for 30 damage for 1 Dark Energy. So it's like, it does both. Typically, like Pokemon like this are just Pokemon that like provide value on the bench, but are really useless and annoying when they're in the active spot. And this Pokemon, or this deck only plays 4 basic Pokemon. So the odds of you leading Bombardier are sort of high. But luckily you can just sort of either hit for 30, KO a baby Pokemon, or just attach and retreat and you're probably fine, you know? So I think Bombardier has really helped this deck, and it is worth playing because if you lead Mega Absol, you're not going to go negative energy advantage, which is like a really big deal. That's a big reason why I like Bombardier. Also, like, there's going to be times where being able to retreat from 1 energy on Hydreigon is really relevant. If you wanted to go into your other Hydreigon, or if you just wanted to retreat Dino or whatever to keep it safe. So I think Bombardier is really nice in this deck list. So now instead of Poison Barb Nihilego, we're playing less Pokemon, playing double Rocky Helmet, and it adds a little bit more space in the deck. We can play Cyrus and Sabrina, as well as double Research, double Copycat. I kind of would like to see a Hiking Trail in this deck, but I understand there's not really much you would cut in this from this deck to play the 1 Hiking Trail. But I do think that Hydreigon does benefit from Hiking Trail pretty dramatically, and it can stop your opponent from playing their stadium. You know what I mean? Like, especially into the Sceptile matchup. Hiking Trail is probably still relevant. Is it more worth it than playing double Ice Pops, double Copycat, and Sabrina Cyrus? Like, maybe not, you know what I mean? So that's probably kind of the decision that, you know, Prelux had to make. I would like to hear his opinions in the comments. I think Hiking Trail is a really good card, but also so are the other cards in this deck list, so we can't really, you know, we can't really say anything here. What I do like about this deck is there's a lot of 2-ofs, you know what I mean? And in general, decks that are playing a lot of 2-ofs, they're just more consistent in terms of their overall approach. Hydreigon's still a top deck in the metagame. Like, we can't deny the fact that I think Hydreigon is still probably the strongest single Pokemon in the game. It's just inherently broken, and right now, I think this weekend specifically, because Sceptile was at least prevalent enough to keep it in check, it might shift the metagame away from Hydreigon, but I mean, if we shift away from Hydreigon, and we shift to playing counter meta towards Sceptile, then Hydreigon will just come back and dominate. So it's definitely not something we're going to count out this season. I still think people are going to choose to play Hydreigon over Zeraora, or Zoroark rather. Not Zeraora, Zoroark. But anyway, it is what it is. Let's skip down here to, I actually want to take a look at Demdud's deck here. This is going to be a different version of Sceptile, which of course is just not playing 1 Kartana and then not playing the Grovyle, also not playing 1 Chingling. So this is a much more standardized version of Mega Sceptile. We have double X speed in the deck because, again, we don't want to lead Trico, we don't want to lead Ogerpon, we want those Pheromoses in the active just immediately dealing damage. So we get double X speed in here, double Copycat, double Research, and double Cyrus, and that we see here is 1 Fragrant Forest, 1 Pokeball. Probably somewhat correct. No Rocky Helmets in here, so no extra damage modification, but we are playing Leaf Cape. I don't know if that Leaf Cape is necessarily that important. Like, it's interesting. It is going to be somewhat nice. Maybe we could Leaf Cape on the Ogerpon, go to 160, stop it from getting KO'd. I don't know if 240 on Sceptile really matters that much. I think if you're going to play Leaf Cape with Sceptile, you're going to have to play things like Lily or Erica to get out of 2-hit KO breakpoints. So I think Rocky Helmet and the overall, it was almost like offense is a better, like better offense is a better defense, is better than a good defense or whatever, in sort of Sceptile, you know? You got a good amount of HP, so but it's not like an incredible amount, right? So it's like you're gonna live 1 hit, and that's the upside, but you better make sure that you're either 1-hit KOing things that are available to be 1-hit KO'd, or you're always gonna 2-hit KO things, which is why I think Rocky Helmet's a little bit better in this deck list particularly. But I do like this list. You know, I think Kartana is definitely going to help you into Hydreigon quite a bit. But for that sense, you know, Pheromos is also a broken card. So this is just a deck that leans very heavily into it. We're seeing almost the exact same thing as like Buzzwole, way back when Buzzwole was like in the metagame. If you guys remember, like there would be like 1 Kartana, 1 Pheromosa decks. There'd be like double Pheromosa, double Cyrus. Like there was all of these different variants of Buzzwole, and now it's just Sceptile instead of Buzzwole. It's the exact same thing. It's crazy that ever since Buzzwole came out, we really don't have any other or better grass leadoff Pokemon. Like Pheromosa and Kartana are by far the best sort of leadoff grass Pokemon in the game. So it's just sort of, at least we do have Ogerpon now. But yeah, it's just interesting to see that it's the same stuff kind of continued on. And then here's going to be our third highest placing Sceptile deck. This is definitely more of a spicy one. This is Quick Growth Extract with double Grovyle and then Celebi to use the Slicing Snipe, so 50 damage to any bench Pokemon. And Sceptile is going to be able to use that attack if Celebi's in play. And then we have a Goomy in the deck as well, which is just great. I love the Goomy. It's just going to slow the game down a little bit. Goomy's a very interesting Pokemon. It is grabbable with Lycia. Like, it has some techs in some decks. You can play Goomy. I think it's just better in general to play a baby Pokemon, but this is a very funny deck list, like a very unique deck list. We also have one non-EX Sceptile, I guess, to just want to KO Oricorios or whatever. This is a very funny deck. You know, it's a very interesting deck. And I do like it. I like how there's a lot of variety. We played 3 Hydreigon in day 2. Prelux actually got the win here, which is crazy. But I guess that makes sense because we're not really playing like any significant grass lead off to KO Dinos. So that's kind of it. And then we went 2-1 into Magnezones, but beat everything else, which is kind of cool. Very interesting run for Drawn here, and a very, very cool deck. One that I honestly do like quite a bit. It's not a terrible strategy. Like, if you do get Sceptile out on turn 3, you start hitting a bench for 50, bench Pokemon for 50, like, you can just target Pokemon so that if they do bring it up, you're probably going to be able to KO it. That's going to be really nice into things like Lucario. It's going to be good into things like Altaria to just kind of put that pressure on before they come into the active. But very cool. Sceptile all over the place, and I kind of love it. Let's take a look at Meiji's deck. Meiji. Can't really, I don't know what to say about it. And this is going to be Greninja Altaria. Another deck that I think I'm actually very terrified of, to be honest with you, because of one simple thing. Altaria and Greninja has always been one of the most high upside decks of all time. Like, the ability to go turn 2 Altaria with double Greninja on your bench is so inherently toxic that it's like, it's fundamentally terrifying when you play this deck, but you know that it's very inconsistent. So it's like, sometimes, you know, you're like, whatever, you're like, oh, they'll probably just brick anyway. But now we are playing Chingling and double Lucky Egg. And the fact that we're playing double Lucky Egg means that we had to cut some other things from this deck list to kind of make room for that. We're still playing double Copycat and double Research, and we've elected to cut one of the Mega Altaria and one Cyrus from this deck list. Those are 2 very important cards. It's interesting that they chose to cut the Cyrus and the Mega Altaria above cutting like Copycat and Research. So this deck is really all about consistency. It's about like not really caring if we're kind of missing a couple really important pieces, because we're going to be moving through our deck so much more quickly and be much more consistent in that sense. So that's why this deck list really does terrify me. Altaria Greninja traditionally has always done well into Hydreigon as well, which is scary. You know what I mean? This deck list is just not, it kind of worries me that Lucky Egg might put this particular strategy over the edge and make it that much more consistent. I'm a little bit terrified. But anyway, shout out to Meiji. Really, really crazy. Let's take a look at Froggy X Fab's deck. Again, one of the better players in the game, 10th place. Our highest placing Lucario of the tournament, and this is going to be Bad Dreams Lucario. And again, like most people right now, like are kind of like Altaria is really finding its home this season as with Greninja and Chingling and Lucky Egg, but Lucario is really the deck list that has kind of taken over Altaria in the Sleep Bad Dream stuff. And I honestly think it just works better in it. There's some, like most of the time, Lucario, like, how do I even explain this? It's basically Altaria. It's the exact same thing. It's just that now that we have the potential to one-hit KO like anything in the game, whereas Altaria was always just hitting for 130, you know? And yeah, I get it. Like sometimes if you bring in Lucario and you only have 90 or 2 energies onto it, you're not hitting as much as Altaria would be, but then you're just going to attach a 3rd energy and then can KO anything in the game. So this is a really solid deck list. Like it is. It's a deck list that's very terrifying because, you know, if you flip tails a couple of times with Igglybuff, or with the Sleep, and you're not playing Ogerpon, like it's just gonna maybe high roll out of your contention. Like you're just out of the game if you can't really get around the Sleep stuff. And even if you do, if they happen to draw into everything they need to hit you for 190 damage, you know, you're probably just gonna lose anyway. You know what I mean? So the really only counterplay to this is basically a Pokemon that can live a hit for Mega Lucario, and that's gonna be like other stage 2 Megas like Sceptile. But also like, you know, anything with Ogerpon can maybe get around this, but this is a very oppressive deck. This is something that's going to be very terrifying to play, and it's just sort of, I think, the new home for Lucario. Or it's just a strange thing. Like, it's crazy that, you know, with all of these fighting buffs in Lucario, like, the best thing to do for Mega Lucario is to just play Bad Dreams, but it's such a strong package, and it's such a strong leadoff that, quite frankly, you know, you can kind of just get away with it. Luckily, this archetype does have its own downsides, which is like when you lead Darkrai or whatever, or if you just don't draw Igglybuffs, or if you draw Igglybuff for Riolu in the active, but you don't draw into your Darkrai's. Like, there's a lot of downsides to this deck from a consistency standpoint. It does remind me of Greninja Altaria of previous seasons, like incredibly high upside, but certainly can just do nothing sometimes. Again, I would love to really hear Fab's interpretation of this deck list. I would be very curious to hear what he thought. And that's basically everything we're going to touch on in top 16, because that's kind of all of the top archetypes that were in the standings. What we're going to do, though, is highlight a lot of these decks that maybe, you know, didn't place extremely well in the tournament, but there's a lot of really interesting decks that did make day 2. I do want to highlight like some Zeraora decks, or Zoroark. I keep saying Zeraora. Some Zoroark decks later this season, probably on Wednesday. And like Hari in here was playing a Leafeon Espeon deck with Bounded Field. This is an incredible deck list. You guys are going to have to wait until Wednesday to see this and a couple of other decks as well. So we'll highlight some of the other players later in this week's video on Wednesday. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, big congrats to everybody here. Thank you guys so much for playing. We're going to wrap up this video by taking a look at the metagame data. We're 30 minutes in. This is going to be a long Meta Monday, but anybody that's watching this channel regularly knows that, you know, the final standings aren't the only thing that matters. You know, you got to look deeper, and that's what we're going to do here in the final segment of Meta Monday. So let's get into it. Here is the metagame data for this weekend. Again, a pretty large sample size, so it should be pretty informative data here. Hydreigon, the most played deck this weekend. Again, it is the default deck in Pokemon Pocket, especially after all of the new changes. Like, you know, there's a lot of weird things going on, but one thing is for sure is that people are going to play Hydreigon. You know, it hasn't really been changed or affected much. So Hydreigon, the most played deck, 66 people played it, 12.5% of the meta share, and guess what? It had a pretty good performance. I mean, I know it didn't like win, or didn't have like a, you know, super dominant placements at the top of the standings, but 215 to 197, that includes all the people that like dropped from the tournament as well. So a very solid win rate for the most played deck of the tournament, having a 51% win rate. Very respectable, a very, very quality deck still. Again, like it's really good into almost everything except for the few decks that ended up, you know, doing well into it. The second most played deck was Lucario, Sleep Lucario. It didn't have a great record. 121 to 130, and I think that's because, you know, there's a lot of decks that are, you know, countering Sleep, quite frankly, still. You know, Ogerpon finding its way into Magnezone, Sceptiles. It's just, you know, the Sleep stuff can be countered. I know people hate this deck, but fundamentally speaking, it's much easier to counterplay this than it is a lot of other things in the metagame. You know, if you're playing PCL, if you're playing Ogerpon, you know, whatever the case may be, like you can just sort of get around the whole Sleep stuff inherently. And Lucario is going to be really good into some matchups, but not that useful in other matchups as well. So not a terrible performance, like pretty close to 50%, 121 to 130, but nothing super incredible. I don't think Lucario is going to run away with the season at all. The third most played deck was Blaziken. Again, still a remnant of early this season, but this deck has been absolutely fraudulent since it kind of came in. Again, the only upside to playing Blaziken right now, and we'll take a look at these win rates, it's fundamentally like not really good into anything other than, I think, Sceptile, which, yeah, like you're going to kind of see. So 7 and 14 into Hydreigon, 7 and 10 into Lucario, 5 and 6 into Lucario Fighting, 5 and 6 into Greninja Altaria, 6 and 2 into Sceptile, shout out, 2 and 6 into Unknown. What is Unknown? What is this? I have no idea what that is. Oh, wait. Did it refresh? What just happened? I don't know what Unknown is. Maybe these are just... I don't know. I have no idea. Anyway, 3 and 4 into Hitmonchan, but 5 and 1 into Sceptile, 2 and 3 into Magnezone, 1 and 4 into Dark Greninja, 1 and 3 into Altaria Gourgeist, 0 and 4 into Zoroark, 2 and 1 into other Sceptile with Ogerpon. So virtually losing matchups into like everything in the game except for Sceptile. And this is why I've been kind of saying that Blaziken's just not very... Like, it's not good enough. Like, it's not a terrible deck list, but I think that the damage thresholds, especially since if you consider all of these decks are playing like Ogerpon and Sleep resistant stuff, so they're able to cure their burn and whatnot. You know, and the breakpoints are very, like, the margins are very thin with Blaziken. It only does 120 damage, which, like, is virtually not a lot at all. Like Lucky Ice Pop means that some of these Pokemon are going to be able to just, like, live 2 hits from Blaziken, especially if they're playing... you know, damage reduction, and like you're gonna like do really, or not damage reduction, but status healing and stuff, and you're gonna do really poorly into like Oricorio with Ogerpon. Like that's just not gonna be a winning matchup, really. I do think Cast Form is a really strong card. Specifically, it's really good into like all of the Pokemon that Sceptile typically leads. But honestly, guys, I said it like earlier this week, Blaziken just really isn't like a top tier deck in the game. If Sceptile ends up being like super popular, then, you know, it can find its position in the metagame as a counter meta deck, but it's just not strong enough to contend with all of these other strategies that people are playing commonly. Altaria and Greninja, 52 and 90, so about a 50-50 record. Nothing too incredible there. Fighting Lucario went 63 and 74, so it kind of struggled a little bit. In fact, Dark Greninja, it did actually struggle here, 42% win rate. So not a great weekend for Dark Greninja, which is interesting to see. And Magnezone. So Magnezone actually ended up having, I think, the highest win rate out of any of the most played decks. 77 and 62. That's a 63.5% win rate. Very respectable performance for our guy Magnezone. And then we have our Sceptile decks. Now, again, like the Sceptile versions that did better, like you can, the data is going to be tough for Sceptile because it's so split up in so many different ways. Basically, double Pheromosa Sceptile here went 47% win rate. So nothing terrible, but it wasn't great. 53, 58. And 19 people played it. What is this? Sceptile with like one Ogerpon, so meaning non-2 Pheromosa or 2 Cartano or whatever, went 38 and 43, so not an incredible record. However, it was this archetype of Sceptile, which I don't even know what to call this one, I guess. It's just Sceptile and non-EX Sceptile, I guess. That's how Limitless categorized this. This went 27 and 64. So I mean, this was the version that Drawn was playing right here. But I think if we take a look at the other decks, they're going to be probably different, I would imagine. Yeah, this is the, like, what is going on? Bounded Field, 1 Lucky Egg. Like, so this is just craziness. I guess, like, Quick Growth Extract, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of strange to see. I think, honestly, there's not much else to really say here. So with Celebi, I guess this archetype, with Leaf Cape is what this kind of is, like the more bulky version of Sceptile. I don't really know. I don't really know what to categorize these, but a lot of these players did pretty well and had, I guess, the highest win rate out of like anything in the tournament, which is kind of crazy. This version of Sceptile here, well, the 5 people played it, just categorized as Sceptile EX, went 19 and 12, and this was what Verum was playing. So, I mean, he kind of skewed the data, I guess, on this archetype. Eku here, so this is another version of it, per se, with 1 Pheromosa, 1 Cartana. No Chingling, though. 1 Erica thrown in, 1 Leaf Cape, so no Rocky Helmets. Again, like, it is all over the place. I can't sit here and tell you which Sceptile deck is the best to play. I really can't. I don't know. It's hard to say. But one thing I do know is Sceptile, in general, does get into Hydreigon, so that's going to be pretty important. If we go down here, Zoroark. So 17 people played Zoroark this weekend, and they went 50%, 54 and 54. I'm curious what Zoroark's matchups are. Winning matchup in Hydreigon. So shout out to Zoroark. 6 and 7 into Sleep Lucario, 4 and 4 into Dark Greninja, 2 and 5 into Altaria, so struggling there, but really good into Blaziken as well. 2 and 1 into Sceptile. 0 and 3 though into this Sceptile, 2 and 0 into Dark Tina. So again, just like really interesting matchups. But Zoroark definitely holding its own. I don't know if it'll really take over for Hydreigon, but yeah, interesting. And then Altaria Gourgeist actually doing really well this weekend, 59 and 48 out of the 17 people that played it. So that's actually a 54, almost a 55% win rate for Altaria Gourgeist. And I guess, you know, potentially just a really consistent deck. Really good into Sleep, Lucario. Not great into Hydreigon, but pretty solid into like most other things in this metagame right now, which is like pretty cool. So I guess shout out to Altaria and Gourgeist for being just still a really solid deck. I don't know exactly what its positioning is like. If anybody has any context specifically about that, let me know. Flygon and Indeedee actually did go 50-50 this weekend, so that's impressive. And Manectric went 16 and 11. These are smaller sample sizes, so don't put too much weight into them, but certainly interesting to say the least. Suicune all the way down here. So, I mean, literally nobody played Suicune this weekend. That's the other crazy thing. Only 1.3% of the tournament playing Suicune back Excalibur, one of the best decks, top decks of last season. 46% win rate there. And then all the way down here, 4 people played Suicune. Greninja went 10 and 16. So we might finally be rid of Suicune. It's kind of crazy. Like I think the fighting buffs, I mentioned it on a podcast with some of the other guys a couple days ago, but I think that the fighting stuff really has impacted Suicune like more than anything, it feels like, because these fighting decks can just 1-hit KO Suicune so easily. Like even these leadoff Pokemon, right? Like if you're playing like Hitmonchan or anything really, Suicune doesn't really play PCL. So in general, like it's just going to struggle. I just think that the fighting decks all do really good into Suicune, and I think Sceptile might be able to hold its own as well into Suicune, because I think the breakpoints kind of line up, quite frankly. Really interesting. Also, Magnezone has been buffed. So just not a really kind metagame to Suicune, and I find that to be interesting. Just literally nobody played it. Lucario Hitmonchan struggled. This is definitely probably the worst way to play Lucario at the moment. It looks like Sleep Lucario is probably the best. But I don't even know if Lucario is going to have much of a stay. Yo, Charizard, by the way. Look at Charizard going 19 and 44. That is brutal. I don't know what's up with that. That's horrible. That's so bad. Let me take a look at Charizard. 12 people played it. Good into Sceptile. 0-4 into Sleep Lucario. Okay. 1-2 into Hydreigon. That's typical. Just sort of lost to just random stuff. Wow. I mean, man. So is Charizard out of the metagame as well? Are we just not playing Charizard? Fire, I just don't feel like it's well positioned right now, which is crazy because Water's not even seeing play. I just think Fire just isn't good enough. But maybe if Sceptile really ends up being a popular deck, then Blaziken could definitely have a place in the metagame. But it looks like we might have swapped back from Charizard into Blaziken, which is crazy. Yeah, I think Altaria is still going to be pretty relevant. I think Lucario definitely still has some potential. But right now it's sort of we're kind of vying for meta viability between these really like impressive strong Dark type decks and the new Grass type meta counters that have entered into the metagame. Things like Dark Greninja, Magnezone, Altaria, really kind of here on the outside, as well as Lucario, kind of finding their way into the metagame. Something else might sneak up and surprise us here. Manectric might have some potential as well. Just a lot of interesting stuff happening. Again, if we take a look at these standings, they tell the story of really what this metagame was this weekend. A lot of Hydreigon, and anything that beat Hydreigon kind of did well this weekend. Magnezone kind of fell through the cracks because it's so broken still. Sceptile definitely kind of popped out, won the tournament, but Altaria is still very, very good. What do you guys think of the metagame this weekend? I know we just rambled there for like 10 minutes, so I apologize. But what do you guys think? This is definitely one of the more interesting times in the Pokemon Pocket metagame. I think as time has gone on, like set after set, ever since I think like Fantastical Parade, they've just been releasing quite strong cards that have filled in the gaps, like slowly. We got Grass, we got Fighting this set, Magnezone further buffed, Hydreigon still exists, so, Altaria is still relevant. It's really interesting to see. In the power balance in the Pokemon Pocket metagame is really starting to shift, and I find that to be an interesting, just a very interesting thing. Like, it's crazy. We get these new sets come out every month, and you never know if things are going to completely flip, like turn upside down by a couple of new releases, and we're kind of seeing that. One thing that terrifies me to this day is going to be the Lucky Egg baby Pokemon stuff. That stuff is just terrifying. It might be the runaway stuff this season because it is just so punishing. We do have counterplay to it. We do have Field Blower, so we can get around it that way. Magnezone gonna be impressive. I'm really happy that it's relevant this season. Sceptile seemingly is like the first actual meta relevant grass type deck since Buzzwole, which is kind of crazy. I know we've had some niche meta stuff, things like Meowscarada, things like Decidueye, Venusaur, but this seems like it could be like a top 5 deck in the metagame this season, and it probably will be, and I think that's pretty cool. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Really, really excited. We're going to continue to cover this season throughout the rest of this entire season, and we're going to go ahead and continue to run tournaments as we always do. PMPT number 30 is this weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to register down in the description below. It is Mother's Day this weekend, so shout out to all of the mothers out there celebrating this Sunday, which might be a little bit awkward, so I understand we might not get as many players this weekend, but we will still be here running the tournament for those interested, and I would really appreciate it if you guys would go and register. But yeah. Anyway, that's it. That's Meta Monday this week. Don't forget to check out the Champion Matt's channel as well. We actually ran a champion singles battle tournament this weekend, which was really fun, and I will be uploading my meta report and highlighting that tournament results on the Champion Matt's channel. So if you're interested in any of that, go check that out. Link down in the description below as well. All right, guys, I'm out of here. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys next time. And yeah. Bye.